Good morning, everyone. So, when you get to speak at these things, the speakers are known to have what's called speaker rituals. Everyone maybe has their own way of building up to their talk and just hiding themselves away and concentrating on what they're doing for the morning. Mine is normally that I have to just kind of close off and keep myself away from everything and really, really concentrate. So our worst nightmare at these things is slides needing to change last minute because there's been some sort of algorithm change, or changes that can skew an entire talk, or speakers getting to punchlines and aha moments before you, which means that you have to then say, oh, congratulations, this person came up with this first. Great stuff, blah, blah, blah. So I get into the habit of actually putting my phone into airplane mode. But this morning, I learned that not only are our phones listening to us, but they're also looking at us. This as a woman is my worst nightmare. Apparently, this is what's on the New York Times this morning, the very dress that I'm wearing for this conference. So Apple News decided to enrich my morning with this article just 20 minutes before getting up on stage today. So if I hadn't come across the Atlantic with only hand luggage and no other appropriate speaker attire, I would have definitely changed. So I'm covering this all off now because we're all pretty well read in here, and the New York Times is pretty big. So no, I didn't know. Yes, I feel like an idiot. And the Instagram handle account that actually is dedicated to everyone bashing this dress made sure that I feel like the world's biggest idiot I could possibly feel. So, moving on. Thank you, ladies. So I am really lucky to be part of a group at Adobe, which are called the Adobe Insiders Group. And last summer, it was really humbling and inspiring to be part of so many creatives from across the globe. And we all got talking about our ancestry and our personality types across the continent. And someone mentioned that there was a way to trace your ancestry back via DNA. So this is one of the 3D cameras that we were using there. I learned that I could jump very high without the aid of a trampoline. And I always used to say to people when they say, oh, where do you come from? I would say, oh, I think I have French or Norwegian roots. I knew where the French part came from. Apparently, Parmenter comes from potato, so I'm affectionately known to my friends back home as Sarah Potato. The Norwegian part, I think, evolved over many years. I was willing myself to perhaps be a natural blonde. I think that's where that came from. So the ancestry results came back. Not only does it tell you random people on the internet that you're related to, it tells you exactly where you come from and which counties and countries your ancestors have lived in and descended from. Now, for someone who thought that they had French-Norwegian roots, you can understand my surprise when this was my result. It was practically an 80-mile radius from my current home. My ancestors never really travelled, they never really went anywhere other than the southeast of England. So I had to wave goodbye to my slightly European history and just be okay with saying, I am 100% English, which is far less exotic when you actually come from England. So anyway, shoehorning this back into web design for a second, it was scary how easy it is to believe my own rhetoric for years about something that simply isn't true. And I think that we've been doing this for a while. We've started to believe this with UX patterns recently. We've started to believe our own silly rhetoric that because they're common, they are okay. I'm going to let this run for a second because it just gets better and better and better. Everyone loves that. So many of our websites and digital processes are broken, and it's down to us to fix it. Every single person in this room is responsible for bringing intelligent conversations to the surface about what can be really difficult use cases to design for. But by not designing for these people, we're missing an opportunity to gain higher customer conversions and acquisitions, build better trust, and lower customer acquisition costs. So let's take a look at what's been typically done to scratch the surface of the who behind our customers. Traditionally, we've used personas, right? How many people, by show of hands, have ever had to go down the route of actually presenting or using personas in their work? Tons of you, fantastic. So what we've traditionally done is we've listed broad attributes like age, gender, job roles, financial status maybe. And what that has meant is that we have had an awful lot of assumptions. We've had to make an awful lot of assumptions about our users. And they're normally high-level assumptions like economic groups, ages, etc. If you want to see how easy it is for computers to make sweeping assumptions about your likes and preferences, take a look at the above URL. Now, this is not me Facebook bashing. This is simply a really easy way to show you how easy it is for these various things on the internet to put you into the wrong bucket. And the best example is this is found lurking amongst your Facebook ad preferences. And it only occurred to me at the start of this year that I should tweak my ad preferences so that I didn't see irrelevant ads for the rest of the year. So this is what it looks like. This is what your ad preferences looks like. It's mailing lists that you've signed up to, and then these get uploaded to Facebook. There's websites that you've visited that have a pixel installed. It's places you've checked in. It's ads that you've clicked on via Facebook and purchased, which then puts you into a highly coveted category of highly engaged shoppers. And also single sign-on services that we use where you're actually using a single log-on via Facebook. So most of the things that were actually in mine were completely wrong. I'd also managed to get myself in a segment for every Chevrolet dealership across the US for some reason. I'm not entirely sure how that happened. So these are inherently an amalgamation of average attributes that we imagine that our average customer has. And what we need to learn is that there's no such thing as an average customer. We've also realized the problem with personas is it doesn't actually tell us very much about anything. It certainly doesn't give us context. And they're normally missing vital contexts that give them value. Sometimes things that can affect a persona can be seconds of difference, for example, how you might interact with a website in an emergency situation versus casual browsing. And this is an excellent article on Medium that I hope that everyone will go and check out. It's by the Microsoft design team, and it's entitled Kill Your Personas. In short, there's a ton of things that can affect how people interact with your businesses or your websites or apps at any given time. And mostly, it renders traditional personas useless if they're so high level that they force you to speak in generalities. So what the Microsoft design team say is we're asking hard questions about the intent and limitations of our personas so that we can design for real people in real situations. We use these spectrums to ideate and iterate in the design process alongside a series of physical, social, economic, temporal, cultural contexts. But designing for personas only takes care of a fraction of the work that we need to do, and it only gets us so far. And some may argue that it doesn't get us far at all in the grand scheme of design. When we add another layer of life on top, and we sprinkle in some situations that can be time critical, coupled with how someone is feeling at the time, adding in another baseline of how a certain personality type shapes how people interact with things, we have ourselves a whole medley of UX issues that are just ripe for picking. The Microsoft design team say, as we move toward building intelligent, responsive systems, we need new tools that further embrace diversity and respect multiple contexts and capabilities. So I think we actually have 3 problems to solve right now. Personality traits aren't static. Most people say they can be drilled down to just 4, but as we've seen with the work that Microsoft are doing with personas, personality traits aren't static either. They too evolve with context. Personas are contextual. And both of these things create moving targets for us as designers. So this leads us to have a need for creating the most desirable experience for the user. But how do we do this when there are so many variables? We've got used to this notion somewhat of fixed design, and I don't mean in the sense of fixed what it might have meant back in 1999, 2000, when we all used to design those wonderful 960 websites. 960 was exactly what we were doing back then. We've got used to the notion of fixed design in the sense of what we have tended to do with A/B testing recently. Now, this might sound similar to a lot of people. We A/B test. We go with the majority of what some people want. Now, when it's not linked to actually a conversion amount, we're actually going with the majority for design changes. What we don't necessarily think about, especially when the A/B testing is close, were pot B, for example, actually wrong? Or was it a preference situation, and we've just changed our design to work for a very specific segment? We don't really know who those people are. We've just disregarded section B because they've said that they're not in the majority pot. But are they actually wrong if you start building in the context of how they may be approaching your design? What tends to happen, or what I've seen with A/B testing, a lot of the time when it comes down to design preferences of certain things, your company, they might change something because of the overwhelming responses that segment A want this design. They change it, they leave it for a few weeks, the conversion rate goes back to exactly where it was, and you're back in square one again. That's what tends to happen a lot with A/B testing at the moment. And some people actually, when it comes to design work, say that it doesn't actually have much of a place if it's not actually linked to a dollar amount conversion. So as Jeffrey said just this morning, just a couple of hours ago, quite eloquently, everything we design is never finished. Sadly, that is our jobs, isn't it? We know nothing, we can ship stuff and then we're reiterating it just the week after. So what I think we've actually been missing is almost the preference panel that goes over our websites. And we can only do this by asking the users what their actual preferences are. Previously, we have been tasked with making the decisions for our users. It's now time for us to think about putting some of the power into their hands and shifting the web into a gear that can be truly personalized for each need. Now, I know by the faces that are looking back at me, everyone's like, Sarah, we've just mastered responsive design. How can we possibly give everyone their own preference panel? Bear with me. I feel like we've done the hard work in building these sites, and now we just need to think about how we can add in these little touches that make the web truly personalized for each user, it sounds really scary, I agree. So the first thing I would do, personally, is wave a magic Harry Potter wand to allow reduce motion to be pushed through on all browsers. Now, not being able to switch parallax scrolling off for me is a real problem. And for the record, this is a wonderful website. Its interactions have been meticulously designed. However, for me personally, it's my worst nightmare. I have really bad motion sickness, which is very ironic for a frequent traveler. And these types of websites actually make me feel, as dramatic as it sounds, they make me feel physically sick. Now, when we were going through these wonderful phases of parallax everything, the web was a horror film for me, because I would sit there and be like, whoa, okay, I'm going to have to just wait for that thing to finish, and then I might actually get to read the thing that I want. Along the same notion, animated GIFs, which one is it? I'm never sure. Do exactly the same thing for me. Repeating imagery does exactly the same thing. So not being able to turn this off is my worst nightmare. And of course, Instagram and everything at the moment is full of these things. So this is the first thing I would love to see, is something that would, for me, allow a preference panel to reduce motion. We already have this, and the browser support is good. It's getting there. But from speaking to the fantastic Jen Simmons and Rachel, who will be speaking after lunch, we've now shifted the web into a gear where it's slightly more complex than what we've been dealing with before. Because for things like reduced motion, apparently everyone is sort of having mini discussions amongst themselves. What is actually down to the browser to set? What is down to your system preferences in your computer? What's set there? What level is all of these different preferences set at? So the people who are far smarter than I am are discussing this at the moment on all of the working groups, and you can read about it. But this obviously is a really complex problem that we now have, because these things don't just extend to what we're seeing on the web. We're also seeing more animation in our operating systems on our computers, and if they can tick a box and have it do everything, then obviously that's better. But that's where we're at with everything. And it's hard to believe that we've not actually been doing this already. It's a bit like when responsive design came in, or when any of these other elements that have had to be bolted onto our jobs over the years have come in. It's almost like we've had those aha moments of, wait, that seems so simple that we should have been thinking about that already. Yes, we should. And it's also easy that we've thought that this thing is something that's coming. We've often thought of parts of our jobs as these things that are rumbling in the distance, and at some point we may have to get to them. The reality is this is here now, and it's been here and a problem for many, many years, and sadly, it's us. It's only us that are going to get to fix these things. So we need to start having more intelligent conversations about what can be really, really tricky things to design for. So just by a show of hands, how many people in this room would identify themselves as an introvert? Yes, you are my people. You are definitely my people. A third of people are said to be introverts, and the reason I'm solely picking on introverts for just this segment of the talk is because other high-level personality groups don't actually tend to have specific needs or UI changes that would help them, but the introvert group does, or at least it does, which fits neatly into a 1-hour presentation. Now, I am an introvert. I am going to refer to myself as a paradoxical introvert, because a lot of people think, well, as an introvert, how can you stand up on stage? How does that work? You can't be an introvert. You must be an extrovert because you're on stage and able to present. And I've sussed this myself. I'm okay in these situations if I feel like I can pass on knowledge. I don't claim to be the world's best at anything, but I feel like I have something to say, and I'm okay with that. But anything else, put me in a social situation with people who maybe aren't from the web, or I can't have a nerdy conversation with, I really don't know how to talk to them. So I classify myself as a paradoxical introvert, or for those who follow Myers-Briggs, an INFJ, which some people think is baloney, but that's another discussion. So Bernardo J. Carducci says, the rise of introversion is no accident. It's happening at the same time as we have this massive shift in technology that promotes exhibitionism. Apparently, we are a growing breed, which I am very happy about. Now, I've learned some really interesting things over the years. I worked for a big media company in New York where we had to specifically look at introverts and designing for them as a thing, which I absolutely loved. And what I've learned is that introverts will patiently seek out complex UX patterns when they align with their levels of comfort. And that is one of the most interesting nuggets of UX that I've ever had the joy of looking into. And what that means is that introverts will purposely seek out buried dark patterns in things. I found this late last night, and I thought this actually describes introverts perfectly. Because one of the most common personality traits I've seen in introverts is that they hate using the telephone. And I don't mean just red buttoning people. They will do anything to avoid making or receiving calls. And whilst doing a bit of research into this, one of the best things I ever learned was the introvert who told me, did you know that if you actually sit on the Virgin Atlantic homepage for a whole 9 minutes, eventually the chat box pops up, which means that you don't actually need to speak to a human, which I thought, you are definitely my person. I nodded along and thought, I would definitely do that rather than pick up the phone. And the introvert who posted the exact UX path on Twitter to get to the live chat assistant on Amazon, which I also thought was brilliant, because obviously Amazon bury these things. They don't want you to actually get to a human quickly. They want you to try and solve the problem yourself. One introvert, God love them, posted the exact way to get to the Amazon chat box. So when I worked in Los Angeles, we were really, really lucky. I was the head of design for a company called Follow, which is sadly no more. It rebranded to Backstage, and now it's sadly gone bang. But it was a really, really interesting time because I was able to look after some of the biggest social accounts in the world. These are people who have 50+ million followers, and the data that we were handling was extraordinary. And part of the UX research that we looked into was actually about introverts, because it was an online platform for superfans of these celebrities. We had direct access to the celebrities because of who was behind the app, so we were really lucky, and when we were testing things, it would immediately have immediate uptake, and we would see immediate results because of the kind of followings that these guys had. So what we noticed was we actually got a group who all identified as introverts, and their UX needs were very, very different from the rest of the people who were using the app. And what they actually needed and how they operated was what we grew to love and know as what we called safe silos. And even on the popular social channels, they would operate in this way. They would almost have their own safe places and safe handles where they would all accumulate, and they would discuss things amongst themselves because they would feel safer in smaller groups than they would necessarily in mass market followings. And the wonderful thing was they would strangely self-police as well. So what you're seeing here is essentially the two silos that we had for two of the biggest celebrities that we had on the books at the time, which was Justin Bieber and Ariana Grande. Those fans rarely crossed each other, and they would operate in these very strange kind of groups where they would almost self-police themselves. If someone then came into that group, because it was seen as a smaller, more intimate group of followers, they would almost self-police and throw out people who weren't their way of thinking, or who were, massive fans of a rival pop star, if that happens. And they were a really interesting group to look after and look into, because they really did feel like they needed their own smaller, safe space. We then looked into what we could do to essentially elongate what we called session lengths, so that we could keep them coming back into the app, keep the daily active users high, but also keep them in the app for a long time. And we learned that they would actually read more than they would participate themselves. And this was essentially one of the prototype features that I created and pitched for a while, where we would ask the celebrities to essentially take their behind-the-scenes messaging public and allow our users to read in real time, because we had so many people who would identify as introverts, and that introvert group would read more than they would participate in commenting. So this was the modern equivalent. We came up with essentially the modern equivalent of reading someone's newspaper over their shoulder, or texts, if you're brave enough to do that. I love doing that on the tube. You can always read some wonderful things. The chats happened in real time and ticked a lot of boxes for how we knew our less vocal users liked to interact with the content. The chats were never stored. You were either there or you missed out. And we played with ways of blacking out the screen instantaneously if the screenshot feature was used, to stop elements of it being shared on other platforms, dulling the exclusivity and diminishing the usefulness of the platform. It had a lot of plus points. A lot of our artists were sponsored in some way, and it was naturally quite easy to pull sponsorship into that conversation in a very organic way. If someone was just viewing things and we were able to have them say, I just went by Starbucks and picked up this new thing. It looked kind of casual and very organic, so it worked. But to actually engineer this was more time than we had at the time, so it got shelved. So yeah, designing for introverts is a really fascinating group to look into. If you have more time, or if anyone wants to talk about it over the next couple of days, I'm more than happy to nerd out on it, because you could create a whole 1-hour presentation on designing for introverts. But we will go back to designing for the modern web. So going back to what we were talking about before, users will begin to value those applications and services that bother them the least and respect their privacy. I think we can take that a step further. Users will begin to value those applications or services that bother them the least, respect their privacy, and allow for a level of personal user experience adjustment. Coming into this segment, we're going to get serious for about 15 minutes. And I think that setting a level of personal user experience preferences will become more and more important in the work that we do. Now, I'm afraid that what I'm about to speak about isn't going to be the most cheery of subject matter. However, by not normalizing some of these conversations in our workplaces, it's kind of what's caused us to be in the pickle that we are in today. So let's have a think. In time-critical or personal situations, what we're asking the average user, now we all know we're very tech-savvy in this room, we are not what would be considered an average user in any situation, but we are asking our average users, our non-tech-savvy users, to have the foresight to turn on incognito mode when many of them don't even understand what a cookie is. So let's think about that for a second. Something's gone wrong, something's happening in your life, it might be very personal, and we're asking you to have the foresight to step into incognito mode or something in your browser that stops so much information being relayed all around the internet. Switch that on and continue your browsing. That doesn't happen. And as tech is starting to become more accessible than ever with the price of smart home systems coming down, the problem is going to just compound with our robots. I never thought I would ever say that. I listened to a fascinating podcast actually the other day about how audio branding is going to start to become increasingly popular because of all of these smart robots that we've got at home and stuff. There's a really, really interesting podcast, I believe it's called Household Name, where they talk all about audio branding. Highly recommend it as an aside. But what I love nowadays is that no matter who you speak to, everyone has a horror story about a bad cookie following them around the internet, or a theory that Siri or WhatsApp are listening to all of our conversations, which isn't strictly untrue, but that's a whole other wormhole that we won't go down today. So cookies can seem like a smart marketing solution until context and empathy let them down. Also, the ability to remove them easily. Whereas it may seem simple to us in this room, imagine the frustration of someone with the following story. So a friend of mine fell pregnant, and she excitedly went around the internet looking at different things, as women do, as we all do when various elements of our life come in, and we're clicking around the internet, reading about different things. So she has excitedly clicked around a bunch of various different articles, gone on Facebook and read a bunch of things, downloaded a bunch of apps, and then she couldn't untrace her steps. So what we now need to think about is, as our technology gets smarter, we have to ensure that the experiences around data usage don't breach any ethical, moral, or personally intrusive code. Now, the reason for this is that, sadly, my friend, she lost the baby very, very early, and she then couldn't untrace the steps that she had taken excitedly at the beginning of her journey and didn't know how to start removing herself from things. So naturally, she phoned me and said, I cannot deal with every time I go onto Facebook, I am getting ads in my right-hand bar, or I'm getting ads in my newsfeed that right now I personally cannot cope with. What do I do? How do I stop everything following me around the internet at this very crucial time when I could do with a little bit of peace and quiet? So I said, okay, first thing, let's download a cookie cleaner. And I'll never forget her face. She looked at me and went, cookie cleaner? Is that a thing? I was like, yes. Yes, it is. Which is easy for us. The fact that we're all laughing, obviously we all know we've got friends who would not know what a cookie is at all. And we're also asking people to know what various different elements of what I think are actually power user features in lots of apps. We're asking people to know what these things do in critical and personal situations. So just to sanity check myself this morning, I put into my group of friends on WhatsApp, and they're all fairly tech savvy. I said, do you know, A, what a cookie is, and would you know on Facebook how to remove things? And obviously, the memes that came back with the normal, non-techie people was, cookies, om nom nom nom. So the fact that we see so much of this on Facebook tells me that people do not know what those 3 dots are used for on Facebook. The fact that people constantly write following because they want to follow a post and receive notifications on those posts means that they haven't clicked into those 3 buttons. They don't know that you can just press follow post and they don't need to write following on it. So asking someone to know how to untrace their steps using those 3 dots, which are a power feature, is way above an average user's comprehension. So what do we have to thank for all this? Facebook Pixel, fantastic bit of technology, but in this instance, massively lets us down. So in this instance, someone has to actually know to use those 3 dots, go into the why am I seeing this ad, that will tell them, oh, you're seeing this ad because you've clicked on something on a website, or with that website had a Facebook Pixel installed. So we've now put you firmly in the pregnant segment. And to get yourself out of it is really, really hard. It's back into that segment that I showed you right at the beginning. Now, this person now couldn't get themselves out of the segment of pregnant without going through all these different steps, which is just ludicrous nowadays. So she had some very, very valid questions. If it's smart enough to pick up on me being pregnant, why could it not detect when I'm not? Because equally, when you're not, you search some very specific words that I would argue is easier to pick up on that something has gone very wrong than when someone has just fallen pregnant. The really specific phrases that people would be Googling would or should be setting off alarm bells around the web saying, there's something going wrong here, we think that maybe we should start removing this person from various segments, or at least give them an option really fast as to how to do it themselves. That's simply not the case. Add in that people download an awful lot of apps as well. This isn't just a problem that it might seem like I'm picking on Facebook. Facebook actually is very forward-thinking in some ways in how to remove these types of things. But when people then go and download a bunch of free apps, we all know the age-old thing: if the app is free, if the service is free, you are the product of that app. But lots of people don't. This app in particular, again, not just picking on this because for any particular reason, but when you download this very, very popular free app, they sell your data to companies such as Huggies, Pottery Barn Kids, Disney Baby, Pampers, to name but a few. And that data goes out into the world. And as far as they're concerned, you've ticked their privacy policy. You've ticked everything that there is to do with their legal side of things, which means that they have no obligation as to how to work out how you backtrack once they've sold the data to someone else. They basically say, if you don't want to provide your personal information to advertisers, don't register for our site or services. You've already done that at the point when you've downloaded the app, and they've already sold your data. This is a real problem. Yes, they have a report a loss feature, but if you just delete the app because you don't like it or you want to try and find something else, you are in that segment forever. And this became a problem when someone actually then received this exact thing happened to them. They were pregnant and then they lost the baby, and then they received a gift hamper from a milk formula company a week before what would have been their due date, because this app sold their data on. And they started to ask questions. I couldn't, even if I wanted to, I couldn't have got myself out of that data segment. Now, what becomes really scary is when these apps start to knit their data together. Now, Natural Cycles is a menstrual cycle and fertility app, and it's safe to say that they have some of the most personal data about their users. As a user of this app myself, it's extremely worrying, the kinds of things that you have to put in and the kinds of things that they don't do with your data. So it does various different things, which I won't bore you with, but it has the most personal data on women probably on the planet. Now, there's certain things that happen around losing a baby, and their data algorithm picks up on that. quite well. But your only choice is to mark yourself as pregnant or not pregnant, which I guess in black and white is exactly what it is. When you're dealing with ones and zeros, we all know that's kind of exactly what it is. But I think we can do better than that. So once you mark yourself as not pregnant anymore, what happens? What would be the most empathetic thing that they could do at this time? Now, bearing in mind, at some point, this has gone through people like us. It has gone through content strategists, it's gone through designers, it's gone through developers, and not one person has put their hand in the air and said, hang on a minute, wait, what happens if it goes wrong? Not one person throughout that process has done it, which is kind of why I want to bring it to the surface and start making us think about those filters. So what's the most empathetic thing they could have done at this point? They did this. Sorry that happened. Paragraph of false platitudes. Can you do something for us? We basically want to know how you became pregnant whilst this app was in prevent a pregnancy mode. And the reason for that is because they've just been cleared by the FDA, and they're also regulated by ISO, which is a worldwide medical standard. So at the time when they should have been thinking about their user and what they could do for their user at that time, they were too busy collecting statistics to ensure it didn't skew their data about the reliability of the app. Something like this would not have been beyond the realms of possibility. We've given you 3 months because we realize that this app is now rendered useless to you over the next couple of months while things get back on track. Contact us where you might actually get a response from a real human because we understand that you're going to have some questions around this time, and here's when your next billing date is. That obviously didn't happen. Someone on their web team did not think about what would happen when things go very, very wrong. So the entire user experience of our apps and websites is going to rely on how empathetic we are. We, as a collective group in this industry, we are the people that this stuff filters through, and we are the people that need to start thinking about different use cases, as difficult as they are. And these experiences don't exist because they've not been designed by people like us. So before we go building yet another framework, or to use a phrase I hate, we need to circle back on ourselves and check that our beautifully responsive mobile-first websites and native apps are actually empathetic or able to handle stress cases, such as what we've just spoken about. These aren't really even anomaly users. This happens to a quarter of all women. And there's lots of different use cases out there, not just to do with this subject matter. There's lots and lots of different things in this world where actually it becomes a real problem for a significant number of your user base. But we're not designing for them because they're not majority cases, a bit like what we were talking about with A/B testing. They're the anomaly people. But it can make a massive difference to the way that we handle the web, what we're doing, and the experiences that we design. So another thing that I just want to touch on, if you, as a company, are storing or doing anything with photos, our UI and UX on photography needs an awful lot of work, because our photo albums can store together the most personal, knitted-together account of our day-to-day lives. And when we think of slip-ups that can happen with photo albums, we tend to think of stuff that involves nudity, weirdly. But actually, in reality, we're way past that. Most people are far more savvy with that than before. It's far less about that. But what we don't really always think about is we don't always save to reminisce. We save to give us the option to remember. And inappropriate is contextual. At the moment, we only have the ability to flag stuff as inappropriate. That's contextual and should be user-selected. So if your company stores, collates, or manages any kind of photos, please consider the following use cases. Doctors. They commonly ask and encourage you to take photos of what you might see in relation to what's actually going on with your body so that they can take a look and advise accordingly. At least where I'm from in the UK, they are very talkative about photos, and they give you the whole, don't worry, I've seen it all before, as all good doctors do. These can sometimes be gross and unsuitable to sit amongst selfies of your cats, dogs, and children, but still have a place in your life. So there's currently only a hidden folder to store these on iOS, and there's no way to even categorize them then. So photographs aren't just for nice memories. There's some real uses behind photography. And what I would love to see is if we actually thought about something to do with like a memory vault, for example, or a vault, or some language around us actually having personal vaults. We understand what that is because of the connotation with actually like jewelry vaults and banking and all kinds of things, but what we don't have is kind of our own personal space that's locked down, away from prying eyes. It's not hidden, it's not inappropriate content, it just needs to not sit amongst everything that we're doing day to day. So again, this is another thing that we need to think about. If your company handles photos, I think we could be doing that better. So now here's a positive story about how it is literally us that can make a difference in this world around really small things. So there is a company in the UK called Bloom and Wild, and they do letterbox flowers. It's a really interesting concept of they send beautiful flowers through the post and it fits through the average very tiny UK letterbox. And last year, on March the 5th, 2018, I sent them an email because it was around Mother's Day in the UK. And I kind of got a bit fed up that there's no way to filter out Mother's Day. I lost my mum in 2012, and it's every year when Mother's Day comes up. Obviously, the first couple of years for anyone who's lost someone in the room, it hurts, doesn't it? It's like a paper cut. And then it gradually gets a little bit easier. But that day I must have had a really bad day, and I just lost it. And I sent a fairly polite email to the CEO of Bloom and Wild, and I said, look, basically, Mother's Day isn't a happy day for everyone. Could you not, in this day and age, please give some of us the ability to just opt out of just that communication? Same for people who have lost dads, Father's Day, for example. You are so linked to the ebb and flow of calendar dates that the fact that your company can't actually give me an opt-out for very specific dates seems crazy. It's 2018. We should have been thinking about this years ago. He sends me back a very gracious email about 15 minutes later and says, okay, you won't receive any more emails from us around Mother's Day. I've managed to do something that removes you from that segment, and we'll have a think about what we can do to change this in the future. And it made me inherently dubious as a consumer that they could save the birthdays of my friends and remind me about those, but not let me filter out things like this. And we all know in this room, it's not hard. We're not talking about hard technology here. It's a link. It's a basic HTML hyperlink at the bottom of an email campaign that says, unsubscribe me from this particular type of emails, please. I even mocked it up for them. I was like, hey, Aaron. So it could look like this. I mean, I'm not trying to push anything through or anything, but it could look like this. It's really easy. It's probably like 15 minutes work for your company. Or even better, how about you actually include a discount code, which would make people think, oh, okay, they messed up, but I'm going to get some money off of my flowers next time. It's all good. So this year, thankfully, they finally listened, and they actually listened around 12 hours before the first presentation of the year AEA. So whilst I was happy to get on stage and bash them for not doing anything, 12 hours later, they'd actually created the thing I sent them. And they put out an opt-out just for Mother's Day and Father's Day. And the internet went crazy. It was like we'd handed them gold bars or something. It was very strange. But it was wonderful. The UK press started writing about it. And it was a really good reminder for me that this was just a link. This is just a really plain and boring link. There's no hard technology behind what we're doing here. It just required a little bit of thought about some users. So I watched the Twitters in the background and what was happening, and it was incredible how many people, and it actually made me a little bit teary, because I was like, how many people have actually just been putting up with this for so many years because we haven't thought about them as a use case, and now a company has. They are being hailed as doing something incredibly technologically advanced, when we all know secretly that it probably took about 15 minutes in total. But it's been a really good nod to when we think we can't make a difference in this world with these small changes, sometimes all we need to do is point out to these companies that they can actually do better. You can do better. Here's how I suggest you do better. Here's a little tiny screenshot that's taken me less than 10 minutes to mock up to show you how you can do better. We can all do that with various things. If we all keep chipping away at these various things we stumble upon for UI and UX that aren't quite perfect, sometimes, just sometimes, they listen. So they actually sent me a really lovely email and said, "We appreciate your thoughtful and kind feedback last year. We're happy to hear that the team has found a way to address this. So far, the incentive has received amazing responses, and we can't thank you enough for your part in it," which is really nice of them. But ultimately, I'm just happy that they listened and that people can stop getting hurt by these things. So to round off this segment, it would be ungracious of me to do a talk like this and not reference this book, as a lot of these ideas have been seeded for many years amongst an event apart speakers and writers, and it's been so beautifully put by Eric and Sarah in this book. So if you are interested in reading more about that type of design, I highly suggest that you read Design for Real Life. So in short, businesses and services should be more accountable. We need to have more accountability for users having control over end-to-end processes, with the tone of voice of our businesses coming along for the ride, but us trying to learn how we can actually put the power back with our users. And we should be giving them end-to-end control of how they interact with us. So just to round up, I'd like to talk you through a case study where I did just that with a company that I currently work for. UX, for me, is not only the design of the experience of the product, but the whole ecosystem we construct around it, including offline interactions, notifications, newsletters, and customer service. So back in the UK, one of my jobs is that I head up design and marketing for a well-known multinational interiors brand. This is a real-life case study of 7 months of ongoing work. Some of the things that you need to know is that it is a custom product that we manufacture, and it sits on the side of a considered purchase, so it's got high dollar value. So we dip sampled hundreds of existing customers, and I wasn't really looking for anything in particular, but as with all good research, the data starts to collate itself and patterns emerge. And I'm a self-confessed data nerd. I love using it as a backup for design choices, as it's really hard for people to argue with. So the timeline of our sales cycle emerged, which was interesting, as we'd told ourselves internally a very different story to what it actually looked like. And in that, the gaps really interested me. So recapping on what we've spoken about earlier, users begin to value applications or services that bother them the least, respect privacy, and allow a level of UX adjustment. And our respect of privacy extends to all forms of unnecessary alerts, communication, and notifications. So part of my team are marketing juniors. This is 2 of them on the left, Zach and Abby. They had a real hard time with this because part of research is that you have to start digging into data that some people really don't want you to dig into because they think that you are trying to unearth shortcomings in their own personal jobs. So they might hide things from you, or they might not want to tell you the full truth about something that you're trying to find. So what I had to actually do was make a joke out of it almost and say to them, look, when you're in marketing, let me tell you, the design, marketing, and web developers section of most companies, we turn ourselves into like the most hated because normally we're trying to push forward ideas and get people to do things that are beyond their comfort zone. So we start digging around and we look at data and we unearth things that people don't necessarily want us to always find because it brings hard questions to the surface. So I said, look, here's these glasses. Whenever you feel like you need to go and dig around in data that you're not comfortable with, put them on and just make out that you're having to do some spy work or something so that it makes it feel more comfortable for you. Everyone will laugh, that's okay. But ultimately, we should be able to extrapolate from people exactly what we're looking to find. So it just turned into a bit of an in-joke in our company that whenever my 2 marketing juniors were walking around like this, everyone was like, oh God, marketing are on the warpath again, they're looking for data. So we were looking at everyone that sat within that segment there, and we were looking at what were they doing in this period of time, where were they going, and how many times were we contacting them, how were we contacting them, and how could we reduce the time spent in that segment. So we went into a remarketing mode, but what we found was the normal process in the company was that we would call 3 times, and if there was no answer, it would get marked as a dead lead, and that would be the end of the customer interaction. Instead of repeating the same behavior with dismal results, we decided to change up elements. We remarketed to a pool of people who had already had the service that cost the company the most amount of money, and we dipped our toe into remarketing to these people in a non-gross way. It was simply there was no special offer, there was no incentive. It was simply an email nudge from us to remind them that we were there and remind them of what they had originally been looking at. And they'd already invested quite a number of hours into it at this point. By just doing a non-gross email marketing campaign, we managed to unearth pretty immediately $62,500 worth of business, which was kind of like, okay, these people are not dead leads. It means that we're remarketing or marketing to them in the incorrect way for them. And this brought in quite a bit of business with immediate effect. So it meant that we were able to actually go and have a conversation around our original process being broken. This created an argument for us actually asking the user their preference on how they would like to be contacted. And this was difficult because the company didn't actually believe that they had done anything wrong up until this point, so to speak. There was nothing wrong with the process. They just thought, well, if we've tried to phone them 3 times and they've not picked up, then they can't be interested in our product. And this is quite scary because a lot of companies believe that they are controlling the pipeline in their process. And that's been honed over many years. Many companies have these processes. They're locked down and you can't do anything with it. You can't deviate from the process. And actually saying, we're going to not do that anymore, and we're going to put a little bit more power in the user's hands and see what happens, is really scary for most companies because they feel like you're going to unearth something that they're not fully equipped to deal with. So luckily, our boss is very forward-thinking with stuff, and what we did was on the front end, we said, you tell us your preference about speaking to us. Tick whether you prefer to speak to someone over the phone or you prefer to do this via text and emails, no calls. We quickly had to change that to minimal calls because we realized that in time-sensitive situations where something might be going wrong, even for introverts, they prefer a call in that situation. It's a very specific case, but we needed to actually just put in minimal calls because there might be the odd chance that we do need to do it once or twice. So we then put people into 2 different segments. We had the people who preferred what we were then classing as a digital journey versus a more traditional journey, which was essentially picking up the phone and doing traditional sales marketing to them. When we gave people the option, 76% of people actually wanted a digital journey, which told us that our process was completely wrong. We asked more questions of these people who wanted the digital journey, and they said various things from, I don't like receiving calls, texts and emails fit into my day, it's hard for me to take calls at work, I dislike speaking to people on the phone, I prefer to control the process myself, and my favorite, I'm an introvert, I hate calls, sorry. And we did that in exchange for a $30 gift card, because I think it's really important. I'm a giant fan of if you are asking as a company for people's time to get back valuable feedback from them, you need to have a fair exchange for that time. So $30, we gave them a gift card, we got some really valuable information back. What that actually meant was our entire sales process, our entire funnel, our entire pipeline, whatever you want to call it, was entirely broken. So they were actually shouting at us that our sales process for them was broken. It was going to cost us thousands to fix, thousands of man hours to put right, thousands of man hours in training to actually retrain into people how to use this different process. But the right thing was to fix it. So being agile was absolutely crucial. So the next part that we had to tackle was the average time between us sending out a mailer and an appointment being booked. And this essentially meant that we needed to have an online booking platform. Our calls to action were practically dead on most social accounts. We weren't able to capture customers when emotion was highest, without relying on them to pick up the phone and actually call in and book the thing on their own. So a booking system for our particular needs doesn't exist, but we also needed to prove that there was a need for it before asking for budget to build it. So we had to use an off-the-shelf booking platform. This proved interesting because we had to set a radius around a point for each of our 27 craftsmen up and down the UK. This had a very real knock-on effect, setting a set radius for people, because that's what the code allowed for, has a knock-on effect when you are assigned London and you're being asked to cover a 40-mile radius around London within the same time frame as someone who lives in a much sparser area, like down in Cornwall and Devon in the far left of the country. It has a massive knock-on effect, and our craftsmen were going, I can't get to all the appointments, this is crazy. So we were then able to code just some custom code. We were able to push that through really quickly, and it was essentially really quick and dirty JavaScript, which meant that we were able to narrow those radiuses down for each of the people, each of the craftspeople who were looking after people up and down the UK. Thankfully, we were trusted and agile enough to jump in and fight fires in real time without much need for approval to set things right, and I'm aware that that's a bit of a unicorn project with everything that we do. That led to us then being able to roll out a fully automated online booking system. We booked more online appointments in 10 days than we booked for the entirety of the previous month, which told us that we were doing something right. 87% of our appointments are now booked online, as to previously it was 100%, obviously because we didn't have a booking system, booked over the phone, with an uplift of 60% on booking appointments overall. A big mistake we made, however, was not setting KPIs early on. Now, that's an easy mistake to make. We were too busy redesigning a website, trying to put out an online booking system, set radiuses. There were too many various parts to the project going on. Setting KPIs, crucially, just wasn't really on our radar. This became important when we launched live chat, and we learnt a hard lesson with this. The digitally minded section of the business recognized how time-sensitive live chat is. We all know live chat. The expectation is that it's instant back and forth. The rest of the company treated it almost like it was a Facebook Messenger type inbox. They'll get to it at some point when they're amongst their other job. It was because we hadn't actually said, as a KPI, you need to answer live chat like within 15 seconds of that coming in, otherwise that person is going to go. It seems simple to us. The rest of the company did not get that at all. We also had to think about long tail conversion. So that is how to complete a sales cycle when the price of the product is high. You sometimes have to think about UI, UX around having a base almost where people can come back to or choose elements of an expensive product that they can then, in their own time, either save up for or know that that information is stored in a safe place. So we had to think about all these different elements all at once to make the rollout of this actually worthwhile. So what we actually did was we were able to drop out the mailer being sent. This went into a PDF that was immediately sent to anyone who requested it, which brought the appointment booking right back. That then dropped out the average of 12 weeks. We were able to go to this deposit received and cycle completion in an exceptionally short amount of time. We went from 14 weeks as a wholesale cycle to 7 days. And that was simply from asking our users, what are we doing wrong? How can we allow you a more personal UX journey throughout this? So that's what you need to ask your users of your products, businesses, services. What is stopping your user completing your cycle? And sometimes you might have to do horrible things to validate a concept. One of the main reasons that I'm not showing you any work from this in real time is because I don't want you going and Googling the site, because someone is going to look under the hood of that code, and it ain't pretty right now. But we validated the concept, and we didn't let perfectionism get in the way of actually being able to just say, that's working, code that, do that, that's horrible, we're using a plugin for that, but that's okay right now. We're just going to keep going, just keep swimming, and we'll go back to it, and we'll create a beautiful version of it a little bit later. So to recap, respect privacy, build in a personal level of UX adjustment to each project. Outlier data can create superfans of your projects and of your projects and products. And just because stress cases or certain user preferences might only apply to a minority of your users, don't be afraid to design for them. It can elevate global brand perception in ways that money alone can't reach, often producing superfan-like behavior, lowering customer acquisition costs, and creating more loyal customer bases. Build the most empathetic experience that you can. As we make huge waves in this world, the differences that get written about, you can make a considerable impact to the way people use and consume the web. Thank you very much.